How many times have you wondered what would happen
The greatest spectacle in racing!
if you took the 12 finest race drivers in the world
It's lights out!
and put them in the same kind of an automobile and put them on a racetrack together? The International Race of Champions.
The iRock brand has been revived by Rob Kaufman and Ray Evernham, and today, for the first time ever, every generation of iRock car is represented, and a star-studded cast of drivers are here in exhibition.
It's like a big family reunion meets racing.
One thing I always wanted to be in was iRock.
It was something that I always wanted to be a part of.
Always loved, being a part of it when I was in it.
I wanted to win IROC just as bad as I wanted to win the 500 and join the family.
It was such an incredible honor to be invited. It was so elite because it was only 12. It was epic. I mean, our racing was epic.
It brings back so many memories.
Drivers, I've been following them since I was 5, so it's been a lot of fun.
Rob and some of his friends got together and helped to really get the iRock brand back. This many people show up, and the response that the fans have given us really gives me a lot more motivation to try and continue to bring this back, do more iRock and do more with it.
The most unique automobile racing series ever.
Just listening to the drivers say what it meant to them, iRock, it was a badge of honor to be invited. And then to get an iRock trophy. If you won an iRock race, you beat the best of the world. It was an honor just to be invited to that high of an all-star program in motorsports. And then so many of these guys had never even met one another, let alone got to race with one another. When you've got, guys like Fittipaldi going head-to-head with Earnhardt and Yarborough and the stories that they tell, because they drove different, like Earnhardt had no problem running up alongside of somebody, and you got an IndyCar guy that's used to, they got to keep distance, and, here he is knocking them out of the way, and then the sports car guys and the guys that fit. Listen to Al Unser Jr. talk about how he had to really learn and watch Earnhardt and how he had to change his style. And then you got the old guys, kind of like Bobby Unser and Al Unser that used to just mess with people all the time. I think anybody that's ever followed any kind of sport, played any kind of sport, whether that's stick and ball, whether it's racing, running, Olympics, you look back through history, boxing, and say, you just want to know who's the best. Could that guy have beaten this guy? Could that girl have done that? To take the best of the best to put them together, right? That's really the ultimate challenge, isn't it? To find out who was really the best of all time. And it's really, really hard to prove, but it's a lot of fun trying to figure it out. The history on forming the iRock series, cool story, but Roger Penske was talking to a TV exec, and he's like, why isn't racing really kind of popular, what's going on, how do we grow it? And that gentleman's name was Mike Phelps, and he said, look, it's got to have some, contest, something other than cars just going around. So Roger Penske and Mike Phelps came up with this idea of taking the best drivers from NASCAR, IndyCar, Formula One, road racing, and putting them in identically prepared cars and finding out who just had the best skill. So they went to Porsche, I believe, in 1973, and got Porsche to build them 15 identical little Porsche RSRs. When you put a series like iRock together, it's important that you try and keep things neutral to a point, because you look at how good, let's say, Lewis Hamilton is in a Formula One car. He may not have a lot of experience on ovals or, hand shifting anymore, or brakes and things like that. And then, you put him up against a guy like Kyle Larson, who is just incredible in anything that he sits in. You've got to make that playing field fair. So having a car running on racetracks that are kind of a combination of what each person is used to, which is why I like trying to figure out things on road courses or possibly on dirt tracks where driver's skill is a little bit more of a factor than on the oval. So it's important considering the machine when you want to put the drivers together to figure out who's got the highest level of talent. So I kind of lost touch with the iRock stuff 94, 95 when it got really busy with NASCAR, but it was, I remember it being emotional. And thinking, okay, well, they went away for a couple of years back in 1980. And this is just going to be a little bump in the road. I know that Roger Penske and Jay Signori worked really hard to get sponsorships and whatnot, but the sport was changing. The sport was exploding back then, where it was harder to get drivers. It was really hard to not have a sponsor conflict, and you couldn't have a guy driving a Pontiac that raced Fords on Sunday, or Mercedes. So it got really complicated, and it was sad to see it go. But I think at that time we didn't really know it was going to be the last IROC race. When iRock started, they were identically prepared Porsche RSRs, and Porsche was major sponsor of the series. And those things right now are the rarest and most expensive of any vintage iRock car that you can find. I mean, millions of dollars if you can get a legitimate one. Really cool series, but didn't really suit the NASCAR and IndyCar guys as much as it did the sports car guys who had driven Porsches and driven some of the road racing and knew how to shift those Porsches. Guys like David Pearson and Bobby Allison, Richard Petty, they were having a little trouble shifting those cars, right? But then they went to Camaros, and those Camaros are really cool. The first, what I call IROC generation Camaro, were out of a dealership. They went and bought them out of these dealerships, Roger Penske Chevrolet dealership. Mark Donohue and the Trans Am guys at Penske Racing stripped these cars, made them into race cars, and they built, I think, 12 or 15 cars in 9 weeks, and then they went to Riverside, ran them there, and that was a pretty good equal playing ground. But they decided to take those cars to Daytona and then to Michigan, and the drivers were like, hey, if we're going to be going 170 miles an hour, we need a real car. I think it was Richard Petty that said, hey, you cats need to get a real race car. And I think that was his exact quote. So they went to Banjo Matthews and built what I call Generation 2 IROC Camaro. They ran those from 77 to 80. IROC was winding down. They didn't have a sponsor. They were getting ready to shut down. And then they had a huge crash at Atlanta Motor Speedway. And that pretty much halted the IROC series for a couple years. 1984 came back again with the cars that I worked on. Started building in 83. They were Banjo Matthews cars. And that's when the Chevrolet came out with the IROC Z. Then they ran those cars through 89, switched to Dodge, ran Dodge Daytonas, I think from 90 to 93, and then changed bodies, went to Dodge Avengers through 94, 95, and then the Firebirds were built. They ran 96 through 2000. So 7 total generations of IROC cars. I have always felt like IROC gave me my start. I was bouncing around or bouncing off the fences in the local short tracks in New Jersey, running modifieds, and I went to work for Roger Penske in the IROC series with under the tutelage of a man named Jay Signori, who has just been an incredible mentor to a lot of people. Just really fell in love with the series. The cars, got to meet a lot of people, and have always thought, man, I'd love to see that series come back. I'd love to be able to be part of that history in a bigger way. And I feel like the sport is changing again, where the sport really went, man, the money got so big, and the drivers were unapproachable, and sponsor conflicts, and then it seemed like, it took a lull, and we're talking, 2000 teens or so, it went down, and it's had a reset, and I feel like there is a legitimate place for motorsports entertainment in the motorsports world right now. Whether that's TV or personalities, I have long felt that most of the race fans are interested in the driver more than the car. I mean, there's some technical guys like me, but you still want to hear the stories about the driver. So bringing those personalities back, putting them together, I think there's a better opportunity to do that right now, because owners have to be a little bit more flexible with drivers and sponsors, and if you can find a neutral manufacturer or build your own race car, I do think that it could be a good series. One day Rob and I were just batting around stuff, and Rob's a racer, right? But he's a good, smart businessman, financial guy. And I told him that I had been trying, when the SRX thing that I didn't work out, I'd really love to do something with iRock. I think that there's something there. And he said, well, let's look at the brand. I said, I looked at the brand and can't get it. It's all tied up and everything. So Rob went to work and pushed ahead to find out that we could buy all the brand, the copyrights and all that stuff back. And we worked on it pretty quietly for probably 6 or 8 months, not talking to people about it. I told Rob, like, look, come on, Rob, it's not going to break either one of us. We spend more at charity auctions than, doing this. If we get it, it'd be just cool to have it. So we got it. And Bruce Canepa helped us out and do that. He, again, another great car collector and restorer. And we said, okay, what are we going to do with it? And they said, well, to authenticate these marks and get everything, you got to put on a show. So we're like, all right, well, I've got a bunch of cars. I'll call people with cars. We hooked up with Tony Perella, SVRA, and the guys at Lime Rock, and this thing all of a sudden explodes. Like it's like a snowball. It just picks up momentum. People are calling, and drivers, and then people want to participate, and next thing you know, we got 21 iRock cars and all these drivers that want to come over, and they had autograph lines and different things and merchandise, and the people are lined up for 2 or 3 hours. One of the biggest crowds that they had at Lime Rock. Social media blew up, so we found out that there is still a lot of interest in the iRock brand, and we started to get calls from other racetracks. I actually was surprised at how many cars we were able to find fairly quickly. People are starting to call, but the Porsches are very difficult to locate because they're kind of like having a Van Gogh painting or something. Guys lock them up in their garages. But we have located about 68 cars worldwide so far. Not many Porsches exist. I think that there are probably 7 or 8 of the Generation 1 Camaros that still exist. You really have to be careful about replicas and whatnot, but those cars had serial numbers, and we've got some good documentation. Generation 3 chassis is a little bit different, right? Because 84 to 89, it raced as a Camaro. The Camaro bodies came off. It raced as a Dodge Daytona. 94, 95, the Daytona bodies came off, and the Avenger bodies went on. So 3 series of cars ran the same chassis. So, again, very interesting. I think we built about 22 Camaros at that time, and then they built some cars in the 90s, but they stayed the same. And then the Firebirds, they built right now there's a debate whether they built 41 or 42, because the guys that own the last, I have 2 guys swearing that they own the last one. So we're trying to figure that out. But so there are a lot of cars out there, but they still are limited. And I think I'm going to be surprised if we find over 70 that exist. We got a call from Laguna Seca about the Rolex Monterey Historics, which is bar none the biggest and the most prestigious vintage historic car race in America, if not the world. I mean, maybe Goodwood's up there with them, but and now they want to have us at the Monterey Historics 2 years in a row. Now people are calling, and my guys are scrambling to get cars ready. We're selling cars. I'm hoping I'm going to be able to keep at least one for myself to go and play with. After Lime Rock, I really felt good for a couple of reasons. I felt like Rob and I had done something successfully to bring back a brand that people cared about, and I felt like my guys did a fantastic job. Everything we had to do in a short period of time, because we had a deal to do something else, and it got very complicated and kind of fell apart. So we had to do this in about 6 weeks, and it was pretty amazing what everybody did. But the thing I felt the most about was felt the most good about was watching the drivers have so much fun again. They got out of the cars, they were kidding around, they stood there. Mark Martin sat for hours on a concrete block signing autographs and talking to fans. All those guys, Danny Sullivan and Al Unser Jr. were just telling me what a great time they had. So that made me feel really good. Wow, 2025 is pretty much laid out, maybe, except for one event, but we were invited to have a class at the Amelia Island Concours. So for the first time that I know of, all 7 generations of iRock cars are going to be at the Concours together at Amelia Island. We're also going to have a special kind of a guest car. Niki Lauda only drove one iRock car one time, and that car is going to be on display there as well. So there'll be 8 to 10 original iRock cars there. And then we've got our big show at the Monterey Historics. I think that's August 13th through the 16th. And we're looking at doing another event maybe closer to the East Coast. You know, there's lots of tracks and lots of events, but we promised that we would not do anything before we did Monterey. My goal, and then moving into 2026, my goal is to have at least 3 to 4 on-track events for the people that have bought and raced these cars, but that would be it. And you know, if you said, what's your wish list? I would love to see it come back. I know there's a lot of financial steps in between, a lot of political steps. If you ask me what my ultimate goal would be to really bring back the iRock series in all of its glory. I would always keep the historic going because I think it's really important that people see the history and see these cars. But can you imagine in this day and age, in some kind of a neutral car on different tracks, if you could see Lewis Hamilton race Kyle Larson? You know, you throw in some of our great IndyCar drivers, our road race drivers, and what if you could keep it to the point to where some of the drivers that are kind of at the end of their career, but are in still pretty good shape to drive cars, you know, guys like Kevin Harvick, Tony Stewart, you know, you throw guys like that in there as well, you might be able to see just the generations of competitiveness. The guys that were really champions, they're champions for a reason. Like working with Mario Andretti. Mario Andretti's Mario Andretti, not because he's a great driver. It's because that guy is so committed and looks at every single detail. And even Earnhardt, same way. Earnhardt would be like measuring stuff on the car, and he would be playing mind games with people. They were very, very competitive. And all of those different personalities, you could see why certain guys were champions. And then, you know, you'd have people that come in that were like Hurley Haywood, you know, multi-Le Mans winner, these guys that were huge endurance race winning people that had to change their style. We're a 100-mile sprint, and they're in there, and they, you know, instead of saving their stuff and everything, they got to go out there and knock the hell out of people, or you know, or the first time, you know, Earnhardt or Petty or Yarborough knock them sideways, and they'd be like, "What is that? That was a foul." No, there are no fouls here. You know, they go hit them back. You know, it was really, really interesting to hear those conversations and how much respect those drivers had for one another. I would say to the fans, if you like motor racing, if you're really a fan of motor racing, come and look at the iRock cars, and the list of drivers that have driven some of them, incredible. You know, when you're talking about, you've got cars that have been driven by 25, 30 of the most incredible and famous cars in the world. You know, we have cars driven by James Hunt, Jody Scheckter, Brian Redman, and David Pearson, Richard Petty, Dale Earnhardt, same car. You know, through the years, so many talented people have sat in those seats and worked those pedals and that steering wheel. And there's so much history around the iRock series that if you study the iRock series, you will learn so much more about motorsports in general. I think the sport has evolved again, and I really believe that there is a space for a form of motorsport entertainment. People are interested. There's a younger group of people coming up now that maybe aren't as interested in all the rules and the, you know, the infractions and this and that, and trying to understand, well, this guy's car does this and he only does this. And if we were able to take that and focus on the personalities, on really tell the story of these guys and girls and put them in equally prepared cars. So you take the car out of it. So you're not saying, okay, he runs on this tire, or she runs on this downforce. There's no penalties. All the cars are prepared by us. It's purely driver against driver. It's purely about talent, and then tell the story of those personalities. You know, draw people in so they understand what Max Verstappen does. You know, what does Kyle Larson really do? You know, who's William Byron? You know, getting those stories out and taking that car out of it and truly making it an equal car. You know, unfortunately for iRock, they kind of progressed to an area where the stock car guys had an advantage. And that was a mistake. Our design and whatnot for a new car would be a car that would be very neutral. There'd be nothing else like it on the planet. So Formula One couldn't have an advantage, sports car couldn't have an advantage, stock car wouldn't have an advantage, Indy car wouldn't have an advantage. It'd be a combination of all those things. Focusing on the all-stars, superstars, on tracks and with equipment that didn't favor anybody.